So Dennis, how did you get the job at Radstock?
Well, I applied through the normal sources, and I was asked to come to an interview, and was very successful, I would say. The governor seemed to be pleased with what I had to offer, and it just, that was it. But I mean, I knew a bit about the district, having been born at Embra, being a Somerset man. I mean, Radstock coal was not new to me. I chose Radstock, though deliberately, because I'd recently got married. Oh, sorry, at the time I was going to get married, and I wanted access to Swansea, where my wife was then living, and later she joined me here. But it was transport, and I was very pleased to take the job. But it was a bit of a shock when I got here, because you came as a student, like all students, out to enjoy, putting yourself about, to discover that all the things I'd been trained to do would not be possible, because they hadn't long reorganised education into the secondary modern after the 44 Education Act. And this school was built on a very steep slope with a very steep playground with no facilities at all for physical education, none whatsoever. They had a small hall, which of course was the cultural centre of the school, with pictures and trophies and all these things, and a record player. And we could do a little there, but of course there wasn't much room. There was no equipment whatsoever. And when it came to games, there was one soccer case ball filled with paper. The one that was used was owned privately by a dear well, he's a minor, who used to come along and do a bit of refereeing. He also provided the soccer shirts by getting his friends and relatives to subscribe coupons, clothing coupons. It really was the beginning, and but thankfully they were such lovely people. I had something to offer, which in particular the boys wanted. I mean, I was a friend of theirs the minute I entered their life, because they wanted this sort of thing. And I think myself very fortunate that I wasn't going to do French or something like that, I was very lucky, and I've been lucky ever since, that what I offered or could offer, they wanted. So we soon made friends, and I meet them today, they're in their 65, 66, and less than that, but we're friends. And I think it worked well. We developed this together, gym clubs, athletics, absolutely my forte, athletics. Soccer was no problem. They'd kick a ball with the pit boots on, but we did refine that a bit. Cricket was not our game. It wasn't a game that Radstock boys took easily to. They were afraid of the little ball, and so we didn't do too well at cricket. It was soccer, not rugby, so we couldn't play various schools, certainly the grammar school, because that was rugby, But we played in Bath with the Bath schools, and we were very successful in our games against teams from Bath, Bristol, and so on, because you had to widen your horizon to give them fair competition. Yeah.
How big was the school when you arrived?
The school, the old board school, was a question I don't really know. It wasn't very big. I think a couple of hundred children would be about the lot. I can't think of many more. We had only 4 years then, because they left at 15, and there would be about 25, 30 in each one. So, and they were split, in this case, by intelligence. You had everybody down with their IQ, you see, and you drew a line there, and they were the A's, and these were the B's or the P's. We called them P's, and that's how the education was done, because there were no exams at all, you see. It was purely the secondary modern. In fact, there's a program on the television now about the old secondary modern, what it had to offer. And it had a lot to offer, because the old 11 plus really was wrong. I know you had to do something, take 2% off, and the rest could go wherever they could go. But there were a lot of late developers. And this we proved because we had wonderful students who enjoyed their education, they wanted more, and they did it privately with us, you know, whatever the subject was. And it wasn't long before one or two of them were doing 1, 2, or even 3 school certificates, O-leveled, you know. So comprehensive education had to come eventually, yes.
So this term secondary modern, was that something that came in just as you were teaching?
Well, we were lucky, you see, because we came out of colleges into an expanding educational system. I mean, today it's contracting. And so the world was our oyster. We had certain guidelines, but we were taught and told and shown, and it was up to us to get out there and do something. And I'm happy to be part of it. Very happy indeed. I don't feel sorry for anything I've done. But we were an expanding educational system. That's the great thing. You know, we could get out and do things and show, because the staff that I joined, the head was he was a local boy from Rithlington, son of a miner, very little classical education himself, but a disciplinarian, you know, and the staff also were, well, 1 or 2 were emergency trained. I don't know if you understand that. Well, as the war was finishing, they knew they needed teachers in schools. So there was a crash course for about 18 months, and you could go to one of these centres and have a crash course to be a teacher and get out, you know. I was offered that, but I prefer to take it a little steadier and concentrate a little more, and I think it was well worth the trouble. So the teachers were elderly people. They were young. So we were the young people to come in, to get closer to the students' age, not being parents, you know. We were, and we could grow up together. In fact, the sort of thing one would do as I did. I rode one of my lads on the back of my bike down the hill at Rithington and got caught by the police. You see, well, I could do that as a PE man, but and these elderly people couldn't. It was fun, and I'm very grateful. And it's been so ever since, you know. I get cuddles from wonderful grandmothers, and my wife gets kisses from wonderful granddads, you know, because we grew up with them. And we were lucky to be able to offer them something. As I say, thank God it wasn't French or German or science or English. You know, it was recreational activity. And we took them out on trips. We used to go to the Schoolboy International, you know, get on the old train.
What's the Schoolboy International? I don't know that.
Well, it was, I assume it still does. As a PE master, we had to enter various local competitions, and then you'd select boys from the various schools to form a district 11, and then the district 11 would meet other district 11s to form a county 11, and from the counties you'd submit your lads to an all England trial, and I was lucky to go 2 years following on that one, and get boys into the England side, because these were 15-year-olds then, 14, 15. And then the England team would play Germany, Wales, and so on at Wembley, which of course was an incredible experience, you know. Yes.
So you actually took some students up there?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yes.
That must have been very exciting.
This is a very strong soccer area. Very strong soccer area. And I still meet one of the boys now, Rex. We went to our trials were at Bourneville, and I was about the 6th floor of a hotel in, is it New Street, Birmingham, and every bus that pulled out that hill went through my bedroom. So I got up and I just walked Birmingham. I couldn't stick this, being a country lad, you know. No, it was great fun, great fun.
So these trials were to do with football, were they?
Oh yes, soccer.
Right.
Oh yes, yes. And the last one, I took 2 boys, one from my own school here, who became professional with Southampton, and Rex Pierce Oh, and Bristol City, sorry. Yes, Kenny Wilkinson, goalkeeper, Bristol City. But it came through schools, then the district, then the county, and then, of course, the counties supplied candidates for the All England team. And if I may, I haven't told you this, but yesterday I met an old student who's a caretaker of the Victoria Hall down in Radstock. Well, Dougie was the son of a miner living out at Whitelands, Tyning, you know that row of cottages? And he was a good footballer. But one thing we had to have was a birth certificate. And great trouble, couldn't get this birth certificate, you see. So I got on my push bike and I go out to see Mum and Dad. And of course there wasn't one. But what was so horrific to me then were these miners' cottages. They had toilets they shared up the garden. And the toilet was a bucket in the living room. And there I was sitting there, you know. So, you know, life was very, very simple to the miner then, you know. But they worked hard and made this place prosperous. They did indeed.
Can you remember the day you first arrived? Did you come by train?
I had to come by train, yes. I came by train from Bath and then a bus from Bath. I could have come, I suppose, by changing on the LMS down to, but I came by bus because it's much straight for the Bath bus service is right outside the station. And I remember coming down into Radstock, and you come down Bath Hill, and it was very dismal. I think it was foggy, misty because it's September, you know. And it wasn't the most enlightened place. It never was and never has been, I don't think. As Pevsner has said, it's an extremely dreary, dull place, you know, because it hadn't got any great features. And they're trying to make features of the batches and so on. But it was a hard-working town, and work they did very hard indeed, yeah. But there we are.
Where did you stay at first?
Well, when I had to get accommodation, and I got lodgings in what was a little shop called Fish's Shop in Bathode Road, and they were great Methodists. And I was given my room, and fair dues, they looked after me very well. And then every weekend, either Jean came to me, and we assumed her marriage, and then the next weekend I'd go to Swansea and be with her until she said, this has got to stop. Because she was a senior teacher already in a big school in Swansea. So then she threw in her notice and came up to Somervale to be P mistress at Somervale. And there she was until we started a family. No, I stayed at the Fish's Shop. Then we got rooms at Norton Hill Farmhouse, which is a farmhouse next to the St. Peter's Church. You go up and drive there. Very comfortable, very comfortable. And then we were offered a cottage in Rithington with no electricity, no water, and no sanitation. So, you know, we started our marriage very humbly. And we had kids born in that way. We had bore the water on the old Primus, yes. That was at Mel's Lane.
Wow. How long were you there?
I think we must have been 2 or 3 years. I haven't thought about this. I didn't know you would ask me that. 2 or 3 years, I would say. Not too long, because of course I think it might be a bit longer actually. Sorry, yes. Time flies. And then we were able to get a house we could rent at Hayden, across the other side of the pit, which of course had electricity. So we had an electric radio, an electric iron, an electric washing machine, and so on. Great move for hot water. Great move forward until we, yeah. Yes.
Now you eventually bought quite a large house, didn't you?
Well, what happened at that time, it was not going to be easy to continue renting, but we had to make a move, and we bought Hillside House, which was the manager's house for the Hilton Collieries Rithington, Upper, Lower, and so on. And it's difficult to describe where it is. Do you know the Mill Road from Radstock, right the way along there? Well, if you get almost to the end, right at the end, you come to Rithington Pit, Lower Rithington Pit. But about 300 yards back, there's another road leading you up to Rithington, the Froome Road. There used to be a foundry on the corner, it's now an estate, you know, and that terrible hill led you to Hillside House. It's called Chivers' Hill because Chivers was the last manager of the collieries for Lord Hilton. And it was a very, very nice house, a big responsibility, but it was something I could enjoy doing, and the kids could grow up in a room of their own. This is something, being the eldest of 8, later 7, we had to share. And I felt if I could, I'd love to give each one their room and a key, because my wife was a bit anxious. No, they'll have if they want to live in a big site, they will live, it's theirs. But when they come and join us, that's our system. They have to come to do what we want, you see. But anyway, it all worked out well, obviously. But I mean, I did want them to have their own private rooms, and they did. They were large rooms. Gosh, they were lovely rooms, and they were lucky. Sadly, of course, their luck. Well, they lost it all because they got married. Because of course you don't get houses like that very easily, and they're now in, you know, little boxes. But it was nice. It was something I'm glad I gave them, and their friends too enjoyed the coming because they lived in the usual little houses, you know, whether they were council or private, and they had to share this and share that, whereas they used to come to us and they could disappear, absolutely disappear, and it was wonderful. Yeah, that was Hillside. 4 children: Anne, who's now 50, Susan, who's 48, Paul is 45, and Jane is 42, the baby, 42. Yes. And there are 9 grandchildren plus 2, because my son married again and he inherited 2 children, and I've inherited 2 grandchildren from me. Yes.
So going back to your when you first arrived here, what other things sort of struck you as somewhat unusual when you first came to Radstock, or typical of the area, I suppose, as being a coal mining town?
Well, one thing that I soon learned was that the miner and their family hadn't travelled very far outside their own environment. I mean, Bath maybe once a year, Bristol I don't know, but even though we had the railways, you know, they didn't travel far. And when we took children out on outings, it was incredible. I remember we going to a Schoolboy International, and the coach took us to Westminster, and we said we will get out at Westminster, pick us up at Buckingham Palace. And it was the time, I think, of Princess Margaret's, no, some royal occasion. And we went into Westminster Abbey, and he was a little boy then, he's 60 odd now. And when we came out, he says, "To make 'ee think, done it, Mr. Rendall," he says, "there's an awful lot outside of Radstock." And this little boy, his eyes were like that. You know, imagine being dropped in London. They all clung. You know, they really, it was wonderful. Oh, I can't, it's difficult to describe the feelings one had with these children who trusted you, you know, and they gave me so much. That was wonderful. Yeah, there's awful lot outside of Radstock, said Eric Coles, his name was. Dear Eric. Mm. But I think that's the main thing, that they were very insular. In fact, it's astonishing how few people outside of Radstock realised the coal was here. I remember when a parent came to me once about a problem, and we sat, and I collected 84 photographs of the pits, and he was waiting to see me. He said, "I didn't know there was a pit at so-and-so," yet he was a local man. So one didn't get about a bit. And I remember when we did some geology things, you know, local studies, we had the school bus, and I'd take Coleford children to Wellow, or Wellow children to Stoke St Michael, to a quarry there, or Cranmore, you know. I suppose the only travelling they might do is if they were courting on a push bike in the old days when you got on your bike and went to see the girl in the next village, you know. That'd be about it, really, because private transport was not on the cards then. Very few people had transport. No, I think they were Radstock, and you knew they were Radstock, or Clandown, or Colford. You know, they were very proud of their own little, and they all spoke differently. They had different things, you know. In fact, when we became comprehensive, we had a bit of a problem. When we became secondary modern at Rithmington, we had a bit of a problem, because the Colford children joined us, the Peasdown children joined us, the Kilmersdon children joined us, and there were playground battles. Well, I had 2 pair of boxing gloves. So I took them into school, and I was on the 2nd floor. And any couple who had a bit of a problem, come in, because I'm an ABA, well, I was an ABA boxing guy, you see. 3 1-minute rounds or 1.5 or whatever, you see. They didn't really want to go through with this, but they'd been pushed into it. And it was, again, we had to do something about their playground squabbles, you know. And that's one way I dealt with it, yes. But they were different people. And they were proud of their independence. In fact, I still use the term Clandustani for Clandown. Incredible, yes. So independence, I think, really. Yeah.
I gather there was a lot of coal dust around you.
Well, the coal dust, yes. Well, that's inevitable because, I mean, it's almost like smog, really, isn't it? You've got the atmosphere. And each pit, because we had pits working all around us, and therefore inevitably it was there. And many of the children lived in pit cottages. I mean, Hayden is a classic example here. And the children used to come to school with, which they were clean, but in no time at all, this was grubby. The ears, and around the nose, and the corners of the eyes, you know, with coal dust, because that's what it was. They lived with dust. And of course, we know the miner himself ended up with pneumoconiosis as a result of inhaling the dust in his labours. Yeah.
So you were saying there weren't many pithead baths when you first
Pithead
arrived?
baths were really new. And so the men, whether the baths were operative or not, still chose to take their dirt home. Some used the baths, but many still didn't, and therefore you had the old tin bath and the fire and so on. But they used to congregate either after they'd finished work. It's incredible, really. And they would get down on the bridge and in the Victoria Square, and this, I call it a painful squat, you know, but there it was. It was their physical pose when they worked, you know, getting down and wielding the little pickaxe to hew the coal or whatever to make a gallery. So it was something they had got accustomed to right from the time they entered the mines, you know. You had to. If you didn't, then that was it. You had to go. But I mean, I find it, when I was a gymnast, it didn't matter very much, you know, because you could do it. But they just did it very naturally, just took the weight and got down and crouched up, you know. It's very strange. But obviously it's not about now. I mean, one doesn't see it.
Were they still caning children when you...
Sorry?
Were they still caning children?
The cane disappeared in 1984.
Oh, not too bad.
Thanks to I say thanks because we didn't use the cane a lot. I only used it once. But the cane was considered evil, and it was the International Court of Human Rights that decided that it should stop in all our state schools. So the cane was last used. In fact, I've got the cane which I use at the museum, or demonstrate at the museum, which was at Norton Hill. And I was a governor at Norton Hill, and the head says, "You better have this, Dennis," he said. I've split it several times, banging it down on the desk. No, the cane, it was never, as far as we're concerned, in my experience in teaching, seldom used, but I think I'm right in saying it was used properly and wisely and necessarily. Because there were certain lads, particularly now, discipline was beginning to break down, you know, children were beginning to have money and get spoilt and so on. And naturally enough, they exerted their own, you know, shoulders up and back. And we had then lots of young women teachers coming into the profession. And these lads could be very, very, well, one or two girls actually. Not that I remember a girl being caned here. I know in other school, yes, when I was doing some training, yes.
So you're saying that you didn't see any women, none of the girls were caned? Or?
No, but I knew of it. But certainly I was asked to witness a caning. The head rang through, would I please drop everything and go? So a teacher came to relieve me. Because having been I was XP then, I had a sort of stature and bearing that was very useful if you had a rebellious boy. So I arrived at the office, waited to be come in, and the head says, I want you to stand there, which was by a door. And the victim will be brought in that door. And it appears we hadn't got many coloured children in the district. You know, we really hadn't. We haven't got a lot now in this district. And this was the first family. Well, at the time, there was quite a lot of, you know, apartheid and colour this and colour that, you know, and prejudices, and Bristol had a problem, you know. This boy had been more than cocky. I knew that. But he hadn't crossed me, so it didn't matter very much. But he'd upset a few women, and the head had to deal with it. Well, the head had come as a deputy head from one of the new towns north of London, I forget which one it was, Harlow. And he addressed the boy, read the issue, and he says, look, in all my teaching experience, I've had to punish many, many white-skinned boys. You're the first colour, bend over. And he has the chair, you know, and he gave a few whacks. And I had to witness that in case the lad, you know, tried to do a bunk or got a bit uppish. Yes, first colour. We didn't have, I don't think there are many coloured families resident in this district. I must be careful, but I don't think so. We're very lucky in that respect, you know. Yeah.
So you were saying that the sports that you were taking care of soccer was very popular.
Soccer.
But you had a big interest in athletics.
Well, I'm a 3A's coach, jumps, and I was very involved in it. Well, now athletics was brand new here, but we practiced out on the Batch. Then we had our sports field at Rithington, which was on the coach, and then 2 nights a week we'd go there and meet. And I have to say this about these children, you had to love them. One boy in particular, Peter, used to get on the school bus to go right the way back to Dunkerton, have a meal, do his paper round, cycle all the way back from Dunkerton, Peasdown, Radstock, Rithington to take part in his athletics. So what can you say? I mean, it was, I've been so lucky. And we did have a very strong athletic team, I have to say that. We could take a coach load to the county, and we could take, at least a dozen to the All England. We could. We had a second in the I think it was the 880 yards, 880 yards, and we had a third in the high jump. But it was new to them, and they revelled in it. But again, I mean, my enthusiasm was accepted. They could have told me to, you know, stick 2 figures in the air, but they didn't. They were so wanting in this exercise. Gymnastics was the one. I must tell you that one, because we had this very small hall, and when the 4 teams, I said, into 4 teams, quickly, move, you know, and they'd go, and their hands would overlap, you see, it was so narrow. Well, we were asked by our P organiser to put on this display at Taunton. And we get down to Taunton, and there was a gymnasium. Not necessarily a large gymnasium, but it was a gymnasium, and it was large to us. So kids are running around, you see, and then I say, into your 4 teams, quickly, move, you see. And they came in, and they were huddled up in a little space like that, says the P organizer, and he stopped them, told them to sit down. He said, now I want you to notice that. That's the amount of space they have in which to do what you're now going to see. And then they put on their displays, and they were good. They were good. So, you know, the kids wanted it. All right, I've been trained, but that's no good if they don't want to do it. You know, you only teach if kids want to learn, you see. And I had that, something they wanted to learn. Bless them. Yes.
It must have been exciting for them to go off to different venues.
I think that was the greatest thing of all, that their world was that much bigger. And they had something which they could show off. I mean, children like to show off, but if they can do it in a disciplined way and people give them a clap, you know, I mean, you do begin to stand up and feel proud. And parents were very proud. Very proud. Again,
how did things change when you moved over to Islington?
well, when we moved to Rithington, it was because of this display I've just been talking about. We had no gym at Rithington. It hadn't been included in the programme. Money, finances, but they soon put one there. They soon put one there. And in no time at all, we had a most wonderful gymnasium. Sadly, I had to cease to be a PE master because I injured my spine. But luckily, I was able to go on and do other things, you know, and continue teaching. Because that was one of the joys of early teaching. Specialisation was not really the in thing, certainly not in secondary modern schools. In grammar schools it had to be because there was this thing called the school certificate, you know. But when I came to Radstock, you taught your own religious education, your own history, your own geography, your own English and maths, besides your specialist subject, which in my case was physical education. So you had a group of children whom you got to know. That's the thing, you got to know, and they got to know you. But of course that ceased because suddenly it was found necessary as they broadened the curriculum. When I came, I think we had about 9 subjects. When I left, it was about 40 odd, you know.
So you're saying you were rather disappointed when this more specialisation came in?
There is a disappointment because I think with specialisation, the subject takes priority over the student. Whereas when we came out into education, we were expected to teach this broad band of subjects, you know, basic subjects then. And you got to know the child, and hopefully if you were a respected teacher, they enjoyed having you. But I have to admit, it's an awful thing to say, but there were certain teachers who were not the most joyful, you know, they were spinsters, you know. And so if you got saddled with them, which I know happened, life could be very miserable, you know. But when it came to specialisation, yes, exams ruled that. It was an exam procedure, you know. You had to have people to cram you to pass an exam. And if I was to say, I was never one for exams, assessment, but not exams. I think that, you know, because you're governed by a syllabus, you've got to do this today or you can't do it tomorrow, and I'd much rather spend a week on a subject if it's interesting than have to spend a few minutes and go on to the next thing. And quite often in education, things crop up. And you say, well, let's talk about it, you know. I mean, when I first went in teaching uncertificated, the kids used to come in Warminster and they just wanted to chat. They meet their friends, you know, wanted to chat. So I developed at least 5 minutes of the first lesson where they could chat about what they did last night and so on. And that was it. They got it out of their system, but they wanted to have a little chat, you know. But now it's with the examination, you know, it's very difficult, very difficult.
So you were telling me that the school was organised into houses.
Well, when you have a large school, you've got to break it down, into the junior, the lower school, middle school, and as sixth forms develop the upper school. And when we started, we had the lower school still in the old buildings at the board school, as you've recorded it. And then we had the middle school at Rithlington. Well, you have to break down these large groups into manageable, and I suppose relic of the public school, let's have the house system. I don't know whether I would have gone for the house system. The year system, I think it is now. A system whereby children were broken down. And so we had the house system, and they were named after the 4 collieries that took coal from our hill, which was Hewish, Ludlows, Tyning, and Foxcott, because I was head of Foxcott. And so the house system, but there is a problem with the house system. You have children from 13, 14 and 15. And the problems when it came, say, to the GCSE or O levels were really only involved with, say, the 15-year-olds. Well, if you dealt with it, you had to deal with it 4 times. In House 1, House 2, House 3 and House 4. Or if you had choice of subjects for your examination scheme, you had to do it in each of the 4 houses. So I think I would have preferred the year system, which I know exists now, so that in that year all problems pertaining to that year could be dealt with, whether it's from the administrators or from the staff, you know, the house staff. So we had the house system. We made it work, of course we did, but there was a feeling we ought to. Siblings, of course, came into this. If you had a brother in this one, and you know, that was one of the reasons. I don't think that's a good idea at all. Let them go their own way. Yeah, so we had the house system.
Now, at first you were saying that the secondary modern system, the students weren't being examined.
There were no known examinations at all. They were the failures, the 11 plus failures. And so they had to be educated by law, and they had to stay till they were 15. They could leave in the term of their birthday. You didn't have to wait till the summer. But I say, gradually one recognized, and we knew all along, that some children could achieve a little more by external exams. And with the support of parents, these children, boys and girls, stayed. They had private tuition in the dinner hours, after school, you name it, or they went through the normal lessons and took the work home. And they got 1, 2 or 3 O-level passes. So we knew we were on the right thing. But mainly the children just left school, didn't they, to go to work, because, well, the thing, get some money, you know, get a motorbike, you know, get out. But those who stayed, and one boy in particular, I have a great longing for, he became a PhD. And he was secondary modern boy. Wonderful. So, you know, they weren't 11 plus failures. At the time, they failed an examination or the cut was there, you know. No. In fact, it's interesting. When I came to, for my interview in 1952, the chairman of the governors, I have to tell you, the governors were all the parish priests from Shoscombe and so on. And the chairman of the governor was the rector of Radstock. And he asked a very wise question, and I do commend him for it. Do you think all the children we've got coming to us are failures? And I had to say no, and I said it most emphatically. Because here they were, governors of a new system of education, to treat the failures. Well, that's not very encouraging, you know, and it was proved right. So eventually, of course, we had CSE came in first in 65, an exam for secondary children. We still had O-levels, and then gradually some could do CSE if the parents had paid for the O-level, so they took 2 exams. Well, it wasn't long before they said, well, let's forget all this. And we had the GCSE exam, yes.
So when this term comprehensive came in to replace secondary modern, that was reflecting some sort of new philosophy, was it?
It was the philosophy that all children were equal. Therefore, there was no question of them going to Norton Hill and you lot going down there. We all had a choice depending on transport or interest, you know, to go to the same schools. Norton Hill Somervale and Rithington all went comprehensive at the same time, I'll say 1970. And we had lots of meetings. In fact, I represented the teachers at the meeting with the heads on this comprehensive issue, you know. So Norton Hill, having been the grammar school, was still the most popular because it had been the grammar school, you see. And a lot of parents had been to the grammar school. So we still had to build up a feeling that, esteem that the other schools, parity, you know, it was going to be, same thing. I know they fluctuate a bit, but, and now we have it. Children can go to these schools. There is a bit of a ring fence. You more or less you're expected to go to Norton Hill or Rithington because transport's there and so on. If a parent persists and they are prepared to take their child to another school and that school accepts it, that's all right, yes. But that's what the comprehensive was about. It was to recognize that all children have equal opportunity, and it was up to them and the school to see that they did it. You know.
Were you in favor of it?
I would say deep down not. I think you've got to accept the need to extricate certain students for a way of life. I think there should be freer movement between the schools. The only movement that occurred between our three schools was if a boy was particularly bad, or a girl. And then the parents had to find another school, so if we were getting rid of him, he went to Norton Hill. Whereas before the comprehensive, any child misbehaving and being really outrageous at Norton Hill had to come to us because we were the secondary modern, you see. But now there is a free movement between the schools to give the child another chance, new staff, new conditions, and I think it works to a certain degree, you know, but yes. No, I have a feeling about this awful thing at a grammar school that I can only go on one experience, you know. You were geared to an exam, you know, and you had to work, and also there was payment, fees, you know, and if you failed, that was it, you know, out. That's the thing, you know, whereas the secondary modern education, all free, you know, you can, no uniform, that need not be, because it's not compulsory. Uniform is not compulsory. The government, I believe, are thinking of trying to make it so, but we do build this into our school. Look, pride, so we do encourage a blue shirt and a tie or a sweatshirt, you know, and grey trousers. We don't want any old thing and dyed hair and, you know, all this sort of thing. Keep fashion out of it. But, no. Of course, things have moved so rapidly. I mean, when I was in grammar school, it was, I think, 7 subjects. It was about 9 when I came out teaching. And it's tremendous now, the choice. I mean, science was one thing, general science, well, now there were 4 or 5. And that dictates how certain exams have to be considered. Because, as our head used to say, a student may want to be a doctor, medical. You see? So you've got to be able to give them guide, and it's exceedingly difficult. And that's why subjects like rural science, woodwork, metalwork, technical drawing, cookery, and so on, needlework, were all more or less, physical education, pushed out. There wasn't time. And that to me is a great sadness. And if you've been watching, well, they only had one program on the CSE, on the secondary model on the television this week, you know, it's sad that people who want muscular skills, want to use their hands, and with brain as well, to be plumbers and electricians or mechanics or whatever, carpenters, you know, haven't really got the opportunity. They've got to do French and maths and this and that, you know. And I find that a tragedy. I really do. I defend the children whom I know want to be artisans. But that's the way things were going. I think they're beginning to come back again. I know the government about 10 years ago had a broad core of subjects, and the subjects I mentioned were just pushed out. And so they got rid of the woodwork, they got rid of the metalwork, they got rid of the technical drawing, sold all the cookery bits and pieces. Computers came in, you know, all that sort of. Yes, IT, all under IT now. Oh, yes, IT. Yeah.
Now you eventually became one of the housemasters.
Well, when we were reorganised, there were about 80 staff, 80 plus staff, and the head and the deputy were appointed, and they had to sift through those whom they'd inherited or had known in the past to appoint various people to take responsibility. And I was invited, would I? And I said yes. Mind you, one of the reasons I think I was invited was I had a pretty sound church upbringing. Member of the church, the choir, and so on and so on, and a church warden for 25 years and so on. So we had to have religious assemblies. Now the most sacrilegious, irreligious bunch of people in this world are teachers. They really are. And but the head had to take an assembly, and he used to, you know, and the deputy, and the lady, she read Reader's Digest a little after Reader's Digest. Well, if you've got to do it, you've got to do it, you see. And I have got the Archbishop's certificate for teaching religious education. So I took it to task, and as my head, at the time I was teaching woodwork, and the head always said, the best religious education I get in my school is from the woodwork mass, which of course relates to Christ being the son of a carpenter, you know. And he used to flash this about, you know, he came down on a course with me down to Dillon and said this, bless him. But no, it had to be done properly. I could not enjoy, I'm not that moral, but I just couldn't enjoy the way it was being treated. And I remember one teacher came in and just sat there, and that was it, and that was the religious assembly. And I thought, it has to be, so that we must make it work. And I was doing this for the school when it's secondary modern, you see, and I'd take the whole school, you know, school assembly. And so I think he thought he was onto a good thing there, you know. So anyway, I got the post. Pastoral care is the thing, you see, which closely ties up with one's spiritual and social feelings. But what you've got to do is to sort out the kids' problems as they're sent to you. For instance, a child would come to you and knock on the door, and you come in, sit there, you know. What have you done? So he has to explain. And I think almost every time I could say, who did you upset at home this morning or last night? Or who upset you? Because, you know, we know which door they've come in, but we don't know what door they came out of. And some of our kids have, well, they're just children. They were there, and they have to, you know, mum's at work, dad's at work, and they're at each other's throats, you know, and they live on top of each other, know where to do the homework, you know. No, it was the pastoral care. I mean, the two biggest problems I had was when a girl knocked on the door. Could she come in? So she came in. I said, sit there. She said, well, I'd rather not sit here. Could we go out? And she was barely 14. So could we go down into the farm? We had a small farm there with some Dexter cows. And then she says, I'm pregnant. Now, it's the sort of thing, yes, it's nice she could say it to me, but we have got senior mistresses and house. No, she wanted to talk to me. Now, what do you do in that situation? Well, I was a dad. So we talked things like, you've got to tell your mother. That's the thing, is telling mother. Which, of course, she did. And same with another girl. But, you know, those are the two most serious situations. I went to see them in hospital, and the baby. I did. Jean came with me. And one girl, we went in to see, because, of course, when you're only 14 and you're in hospital, you know, the old mums like this, and this little girl saw us coming in the ward. She'd had the baby that night. The baby was in an anteroom at St. Martin's. Out of bed she jumped, raced down to bring the baby to us. Tears, you know. Yeah, it's no fun being a school teacher.
Did you have much contact with the parents?
Oh, a lot. It's a boast really, but I am going to boast. We used to send out invitations to the parents to come in and talk about their child's progress, either before or after an exam or so on, at least once a year. We'd send a report, do come in. Well, not every parent is interested in their kids. Primary school, yes, but not secondary. We get very, only if there's real trouble. And I took this very seriously. So the parents weren't coming to me. So I got in my car and I went to them. Now the head to begin with wasn't at all pleased with this. He thought this was wrong. School is school. They've got to come. Well, I had a mum who didn't come to my grammar school at all while I was performing, and I was in the choir and I was an actor, and I went bad, but mum never came, or my father, and that was upsetting, because children are looking, where's mum and dad? Well, I knew they weren't coming, so it didn't matter. But so I went out to see them, and I have to say this, we had an administration meeting, and I could say, all done. Others had 8, 10, 12 or more parents they hadn't dealt with about their child. Well, if the parent writes the child off, that's just too bad, isn't it? But, I felt it was worth persevering, and I got credit for it. It's a bit of a bind, knocking on doors. But they were pleased, really, because I think just like my mum, they hesitated to come to school. And I can prove that because I had a particular girl who was always very friendly. I never taught her, but she was a lovely girl, always friendly. There must be something behind this, but she wouldn't let on about it until we had not my parents' evening, but I was there for a subject thing at a house. And this mum walked through the hall and her face coloured up, and she came straight up to me. Nothing to do with me, but she was one of my old students. And her daughter had never let on, Rita, my mum. Another one, Lisa, my mum. In fact, I was with mum, who's 65, on Saturday at the flower show. They don't let on. And because, school was a place that I think parents of my generation didn't go back to. They weren't invited, were they? It wasn't the done thing, school was school, and that was that. Oh yes, I certainly found that part of my teaching career of great importance. In fact, my final assembly, I used the Trinity, not the Father, Son and Holy Ghost, but putting the child first, and the parent, and last of all the teacher. It's a triple grouping to develop, and I remember that because I used the Beethoven triple concerto as my music, one of my favourite pieces. Yes, the parents are very important, and if they write their child off, well, God help us, God help us.
So you're saying they raised the school age at a certain point?
Well, you see, as children were leaving school at 15, those who wanted to do exams had to stay on until they were 16. So they started to raise the leaving age. You couldn't leave in the term that you were 15. You had to wait till the end of the school year. Well, it seemed silly then for those children to leave if they could stay on and take part in an examination. So all children had to stay on to 16, the rate Rosler. I'm not sure when that was. Oh dear.
Did you say 65 to me before?
No, 65 was the CSE, an examination for those 16 in secondary modern schools, a certificate children should leave with a certificate of education, you know, CSE.
And then the term comprehensive came into effect about 1970. I think.
That's right, yes. Well, once you got there, even then, as far as I remember, children were still able to leave and not stay on to 16. Do you know, I ought to have found this out, didn't I? Because you mentioned it in the...
Oh, that's quite all right. We can...
Yeah, so in the end it was ROSLA, which meant that a bit of a problem, because we had an awful lot of children, I have to say an awful lot of children, who were not in the ordinary sense of examination fodder. You know, what we're going to do with them, you see. And they had to have subjects which they could at least enjoy having to stay in school to do. It's no good trying to make them and do various, because they were uncomfortable. They wanted to leave, you know, they wanted to work, you know, they wanted to get out there. So we had to rethink for them courses of work which would keep them interested. And that's where, at that time, being a practical person, I was asked to begin with to look after the ROSLA, be responsible, see that things were there for them, you know. And we did an awful lot of work, like local history. We did walked the canal, the Radstock Coal Canal, the Somerset Coal Canal. We visited various places, quarries and so on and so on and so on, you know, to get them in their locality, rather than worry about Australia or South Africa, or, you know. It was more important to me, and I felt I was right, that they should know a bit about their own district. And that was sort of one of the aspects. Obviously the practical work, metalwork, woodwork, technical drawing, and cookery, needlework, and so on, art, pottery, all these things came in. Well, but then in the end they decided that the exam should be for everybody, and they would give you the GCSE, because they linked then the GCE with the CSE, so that there's this common exam in different grades from 1 to whatever, and students would be entered for it, and depending upon which level they would get a grade, whatever, you know. And that really is how it all came about. So they all take roughly the same exam. I can't say I'm happy for some of the poor kids, but there we are. And sadly too, I have to say this about my head, he would insist, whether he got his instructions, I don't know, they all had to do maths and English and so on. Well, really, they're two subjects which, if you are not very bright, they're the ones that set you against education as a whole, you know. But they had to do it, you see, and they had to do some cases extra. And then they all had to do a foreign language. The most inept child, the dullest, had to do a foreign language. You know, and I felt this was not good. But one had to go along with it, because we were not powerful enough, you know. It's all changed now, you know. There's always change. But at that time, I did feel sorry for a lot of the less able children being forced through this examination ritual for the sake of government, you know. There we are. Yeah.
You were saying to me earlier that the raising the school age also had some political connotations as well, in terms of employment statistics and things.
Well, I believe, I still do, raising of the school leaving age is a political ploy. It's to keep people off the labour market. Particularly now when they're trying to get people to work on until they're 60 odd, 70 odd, you know, before they get a pension. Well, I believe if we can ask those of 60 and to retire and enjoy a bit of life, you know, before they kick the bucket, it's better that the young people are on the work ladder. But I'm sorry to say that's not what everybody's thinking. I mean, they even talk about raising the school leaving age to 18. Well, God help us if they do, because there's only one reason. It's not to send out more able whatever. It's really to keep them out of the market, so that it's far better to keep them in school than pay them unemployment benefit. That's my personal feeling. I think I'm right, actually. But I do worry when, in my case, you see, if you're in a post of responsibility, a young teacher comes in, what does that teacher to do? You have to apply to go elsewhere or wait to fill dead men's shoes, you know. And in some of our country schools, I mean, I was there nearly 40 years, you know, so I'm a bad example, really. So people had to come in, do a bit and go. You know, instead of being happy to live and work in your community and outside the school, you know, you had to move and go elsewhere. So I do feel that raising the school leaving age has a political bent in order to keep young people out of the labour market. I'll probably be sent to the tower for saying it, but I mean, I know that some children want to work. They're ready for work. Many of them are already working, whether they're helping dad or somebody, and a lot of them are working in order to earn money. Not just newspapers, but working in shops and factories, certainly in our cities, and some of them quite young in the sweatshops. And I feel that what I'm saying is probably got a lot of truth in it. And children do want money. And
Sorry, please finish that point.
and they're only going to get money by working because parents will give them so much. But if they want DVDs and tellies and all this, that and other, they're going to have to get some money from somewhere. Sadly, some want it for drugs, but that's another story.
Just pause there for a second. Now, you were saying that they raised the school leaving age, and of course, in respect to employment, that was something that changed quite radically in the time you were teaching here.
Oh, indeed. I mean, people went to work. I mean, if you've been to a grammar school and you got your O-levels, either you went on to A-levels in university, but there was a definite way you were going to go. You were expected to go, you know, whereas the others were just fodder for factories, farming. In my case, it was on the farm, you know, and so on. Because for a short time, I was asked to be the career master. They needed it. It was the in thing. Would I do it, you know? So we hadn't got many kids leaving, but they came and we had a chat, you know, and interview with parents and so on. But it was work, not the mines. That once the national service finished, that was it. The mines, they weren't going to mines. But we had, as the mines were beginning to decline, an influx of development. Clark's shoes, very big factory. We had Purnell's printing, a very big factory, and showerings and so on. There were very quite interesting factories, but it was labour. Paid a lot of money, good wages, but it was, you know. And I was asked, I found this very sad. So these lovely kids came to me, and we'd had this letter. We want good stuff, you see. So I did my little bit and gave them the information. They went along to Clark's, and sadly Clark's wouldn't employ one of them. And I had the letter for some time because it said they'd be bored. Because it's, well, if you ever went to Clark's factory, any factory, oh God, no, dreadful. Yeah, they'd be bored. And I sent good students, you know. Again, it's interesting because one of the students, her father, ex-miner, but he had a lorry. And there are lots of men who ex-miners, who had a horse and cart, or if they could afford a lorry, and they used to do what's called bag coal. Every miner's family was allowed so many hundredweight of coal, you see, and this is what they did. And it was quite a business. And Mr. Jacob was our coal man. And we were sitting in my little kitchen. "Tidn't right, Mr. Rendall," he says. "Our Wend, she's up at Clark's getting £10 a week. That's more than the profit I make." See, boring job, but they paid well. And in a way, it was the ruin of the area, or ruin of society, in my opinion. You know, getting these young people in, working them, you know, because they'd do it to get the money. And they got the money. But then what did they do with it? It was Benidorm and caravans and cars and all this sort of thing. You know, that's what the money's for, to be spent and to enjoy the luxuries of the age. You know, whereas up to then one worked, but one didn't have that much extra to spend. So I think, if I may again be political, youth culture took over. It was the youth who were being fed the jobs, given the money, and they bought the magazines and the records and the CDs. They bought the alcohol and the drinks, and they, you know, fashion, it was in youth because they had the money, and they foolishly wanted to get rid of it. Whereas in my days and my parents' days and your, you kept on to a bit of it, a little bit, for a rainy day or whatever. So, yeah, great change, social changes, I think, then.
Just stop there. I suppose in 1984, or in the late 70s and into the 80s, as you were coming up for retirement, then already the factories were starting to close down.
They were beginning to do so, yes, because shoes are take Clark. Shoes are much cheaper to be produced in Southeast Asia and so on. In fact, Clarks are encouraging them because they're only interested in profits, aren't they? And so the factory, we had a very large one at Westfield, St. Peter's. And so that was a great sadness. The International Printing Company, which was the largest printing company in Europe, stationed at Bolton, that began to decline. They were losing to printers in Italy, Japan, and again Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, you know, where labour is cheap. And so again, opportunities there were disappearing. So I think education had to be necessary to keep, again, thinking back to Rosler, keeping kids out of the workforce because there was no work for them. You know, I really don't know. Well, I know another thing that was quite important. We had lots of engineering in the west of England. In fact, my son and my son-in-law trained as engineers, and they were very much involved with military wear, some aspect of military wear. But of course, when the Iron Curtain disappeared and the Berlin Wall came down and then Russia began, there seemed to be, well, there was no need for this heavy commitment to arms. In fact, I think I'm right in saying armament was the greatest export from this part of the country, or Britain. We exported arms. So there was another aspect of life that began to disappear. And I know it affects my son and son-in-law because work is very hard to come by in engineering. So again, you say, well, why train engineers? You know, be a plumber because the pipes will freeze. You'll have a job. You know, yes.
So where were the kids finding work then?
Well, this is a bit of a problem, really. I don't know. The ministry took on a lot. I mean, the Admiralty took on a great deal of people at Bath. Then most of them have gone over to Bristol, to Abbey Wood, you know, for career-wise. My grandson is involved with computer work with what would have been an Admiralty job, but it's now private, something mercantile, something, you know. He's involved in that. The catering trade, I think, has done very well. Obviously, management of the elderly and the sick. Homes sprouted all over the place about 10, 15 years ago, and so they're still about now, where the elderly are being cared for as we live longer, you know. So that's another aspect. But with regards interest, I don't think there is a great deal for them. I really don't. Again, I hadn't thought, I should have done a bit of a study, shouldn't I? Where do you go to work?
It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it, really?
Yes, they do find work.
Yeah.
Although we have got quite a number of young people, certainly a number of young people, who will probably never work. You know, they found a way of avoiding it now, and they get allowances, and they've got a standard of living which is within their handouts, you know. So what's the point of working for less in some cases?
Just to move on to another subject then, can you tell me why did you want to be a teacher? What motivated you to do
Well,
that?
I think what started it was when I took the 11 plus at my little village school. There were two of us, I was a boy and a girl, Phyllis. And I was successful. I didn't get a scholarship. There was a scholarship which we went free, or there was one, the first one was 3 guineas a term, 9 guineas a year, which was the one that I would have got, which was A, B, C, I don't know. And my father said, oh, he's not going there, he's going to work. Milk. Well, I was milking twice a day anyway, you know, hand milking. So that was it. Well, the schoolmistress was a Mrs. Mowbray, a charming lady. She had no children of her own, but she really was a motherly figure. Her little school was her. There's another teacher as well in the infants. And she really looked after. Have you been to Sturton, Stourhead?
Yes.
You probably parked your car at the top and looking down on that little old building, that's the school, the village school.
Oh, really?
That's the village school. Anyway, she asked to meet my parents. Well, now, in those days, you went to bed quite early. Young people, they weren't on the streets, you went to bed. And so I was certainly in bed. And Mrs. Mowbray came to meet my parents. And thank goodness, my mother was a very strong-willed person. And she'd worked on the land in the First World War. And my father was eventually persuaded that I shouldn't leave school. I should carry on into a grammar school where I would make a career of something or other, don't know what. And that, I think, is the real beginning. The admiration for a woman, a head teacher, who could show such an interest in a child who obviously had potential, and she wanted to see it mature. And I think that would be the reason. I then, when I was in the army in radar, I found myself lecturing, and I found it quite easy to learn facts and put them over, you know. So I think teaching wasn't going to be difficult in the sense of teaching knowledge, but of course there are lots of other aspects to being a teacher, or should be, to being a teacher, you know, which is this counselling and feeling for the kids. They are your kids, you know. For instance, I have a thing about commuting. When I was in Radstock, there were about 2 or 3 teachers who lived within what I call spitting distance of the school. The others came from Bristol, Keynsham, Bath, Frome, and so on. And which meant when they left, we'll say at 4 o'clock plus, that was the end of it. And our head, certainly, he had the theory that the higher up the ladder you were, the farther you lived away from your job, you see. And so I, living in the village, I used to get the parents come to me about, well, Johnny's lost his raincoat, or someone's pinched his pen, or, you know, and I was used far more than the head, and the head said, good luck to you, to say, you know, because they could come and knock on my door and we'd do something about it, but they couldn't go to the head because they didn't know where he lived anyway. But commuting, and whereas I felt the village schoolmaster in those days lived in the village, and I was brought up where there was the squire, Sir Henry Hoare, the vicar in the vicarage, and the schoolmistress, and they were the 3 people to whom you raised your hat and respect, and they led you and cared for you, you know. That was part of the old feudal system, I suppose. Yes, I did admire that lady tremendously.
And of course, after the war, with the new secondary modern scheme, you were saying it was everyone was very motivated about.
Well, it was new, and you see, education was the thing, and therefore, anyone who wanted to teach was being encouraged to teach. You know, it wasn't as if you couldn't do anything else, you taught. You know, like Bernard Shaw said. You know, you went out there to teach, and fair dues. I have to say, there's the men I was in college with and I met later. There are very few people who were misguided in their way. You know, they did a good job, and I think locally the children were very fortunate. Well, obviously 1 or 2 problems do arise, but in the main, I have to say this, that people came here, they stayed long enough to see a child through. And what I used to get a bit uptight about was a teacher would come, and after about a year or two, promotion. Well, they hadn't seen a child through to a result, you know, to see whether it all been worthwhile. So I used to get a bit uptight about that. I think you ought to stay long enough to see the results of your labour, of a group, you know, which is 4 years really. But some would want to move, because many of the teachers, of course, weren't local. I mean, I by chance was local, but that was just, it really was by accident. But the others, when I came here first, were local. The headmaster, the deputy head, the science man, they were all born and bred in this district, you know. Whereas then teachers coming from colleges were applying for jobs, say from Somerset in Newcastle or whatever, you know, they just applied for jobs. And so you had a new image altogether, new language. They didn't speak the same as what we did, you know. Yeah, I know they used to take the mickey out of our head, really, when we had an assembly and the kids used to really laugh at this, and of course you couldn't help but overhear them. And then I'd join in the humour, but, you know, try and, because he was new, he was from Lancashire. Well, they do talk quite differently in Lancashire, you know, yes.
Did you wear a cap and gown?
No,
No?
no. They disappeared, I would have said, during the war. My grammar school staff all wore them. Then they came out for speech days, and then as we had non-graduates in teaching, it seemed they were oh dear, it doesn't matter. They decided quite arbitrarily not to wear them, and they were a damn nuisance. You clean the blackboard with this thing, you know, and so they disappeared. And I'm trying to get a new, well, not a new one, but another one for the museum, but people haven't got them. I mean, my family graduated, but they wouldn't have a cap and gown. I said, I'll buy it. So, oh no, I want that photograph for your mother, you see. So they wouldn't, so they hired them. My two granddaughters recently graduated, but no, they wouldn't. So I've got to try and get one for the museum. You've seen my years through.
Now, I guess the devil's advocate might say that, you know, when you got out of the army, with all your experience in radar and your training with Marconi, that, you know, you could have had quite a career in the world of electronics and all that.
I suppose, because I started off in those days with a crystal set, you know, the little cat's whisker, and you played around with a blooming great horn speaker. It was wonderful. But then they were available then, because suddenly the loudspeakers were radio sets like you see along here. But in the old days, they weren't. And so we could have all these bits, and you had big wire. Have you ever seen the wiring system? They'd have a piece of wire soldered here and then screwed on there. It was wonderful. And I remember one of my first sets was a crystal set, but it was built inside the most enormous radio cabinet. It looked none of the knobs worked, but it looked wonderful. And that's how I... thanks to someone who took an interest in me and said, I think you ought, you know. And he got me into Marconi's. I mean, my mother and father couldn't have done it. My school wouldn't have done it. So I left my sixth form to go in to do the IE at Marconi's. Yeah.
But you weren't tempted by that world?
I couldn't see myself. I'm a country boy. And I think deep down, I wanted to be in the country, home. It's like the army. I had a great opportunity in the army, that I can assure you of that. I had my WASB for commission. But I was stationed at various places, married quarters. They were horrific. And I knew I was going to consort with women, which means marriage. I was that sort of person. And I could not see myself there. The army, no, I was quite happy with the army. I admired the army. I wished we had more of the discipline and the order and national service, you know, for some of these lads, you know. But I couldn't see me relaxing with a wife and family. And that's put me off that, which is a great pity, because I had the opportunity there, I can assure you, you know. So that was the first one. And I'd made up my mind I was going to teach. And I don't regret it at all. I don't regret it at all. I wouldn't want to go back. Well, they wouldn't have me now, because I'd end up in Jug, I think, dealing with some of the rascals. But there we are.
Yeah, I mean, I gather from your conversations we had before that you're somewhat critical of the way that the system's running now.
Well, I am to a certain degree. One always does that, you know, one looks back and can be critical. But unless you can put something in, it's wrong to criticize. For instance, the head doesn't teach. The head is a manager, an administrator, it's a business, a lot of money. They've got their own budgets now. You know, so it's a totally different situation. Well, if I was new and went into it, probably it wouldn't be so bad. But looking back, I think we had the best of it. We taught with kids, you know, and you just churn them out, and it's exams and it's tables, you know, the government have insisted on to see which school is doing this and which school isn't doing that. And I don't like it. I really don't like it. I think the school should be left alone with the inspectorate. I mean, inspectorate. We always had that inspectorate come along, and each authority had its inspectorate. And they were good people, and they would come in and they'd stay with you and talk with you, and then you'd have a general inspection, and they'd call you all in, you know. I remember when we had our last general inspection, I was the senior of two, and the other man was in his 20s. He was IT, and he was full of technology, whereas I know he's been into his hand skills, you know, neuromuscular skills. You know. And when the report was read out to us, it was quite amusing, because the inspector, chief inspector, mentioned our department. He says, a good balance there, he says. You've got an old whatever and a young man with new ideas, you know, which is, you know, there's always someone with new ideas, but at least we were able to express them and help each other, whereas in some cases new ideas get suppressed because the old one won't have it. You know, you've got to wait till you fill that man's shoes before you start. And it was one of the criticisms I remember at a conference I went to, where young teachers felt free to air their feelings, and they were disappointed because they'd been in university, then their college, that's 4 years, sometimes 5, and they were full of ideas. They come out into schools, well, you can't suddenly go in and push that lot. You've got to do as you're told. And they felt very unhappy that they were going to have to wait until they were senior enough to say, this is what I want done. But by then, a lot of the spirit had gone, which is, that's youth, isn't it? I mean, all of us have been full of ideas as young lads and lasses, you know. I did feel sorry for them, but then I had to wait too. But thankfully mine was a subject where I could do it with them, do a somersault with them, or kick a ball with them, or, you know, I could run with them, throw with them, which is different, yes.
What prompted you to retire?
Well, retirement was forced upon me. I had 2 kidney operations, and the last one was very serious, very, very serious. And I didn't want to retire. I was offered to retire on a pension through ill health, and I thought, no, I'll walk out of here, which was rather foolish, because I'd have had a better pension. But still, no, I decided I would stay. Well, now the head also was ill, and he always said, I don't get headaches. I pay you chaps to get headaches, you know. You get the headaches, you see. Well, he was ill, and he became more of a friend. He was a very good friend, very kind friend, when I was very ill, and very kind to Jean. And he came to see me regularly in hospital in Bath. And when I came out, I had to have, I had 6 months off. He wanted the authority to give me a part-time post until retirement, and the authority wouldn't have it. Either you're full-time or not, you see. And he was most generous in his attitude to my ill health. Well, he was forced to retire through ill health. He was an ex-veteran. He had bullets in his body. He really was. So he said, "Look, let's go." And I said, "No, I want to walk out here. I want to walk out here." So I stayed on only for another year. By then I was quite ill. I used to go home at night, have a bath, take my work to bed, to get up in the morning to go to school. This is true every night, which is ridiculous. And then acting head said, "Well, this is ridiculous." And at that time we were beginning to contract. There weren't the jobs now. There was a thing where schools were closing down or hadn't got enough pupils, so there were senior staff wanting a job. And in my case, there was a senior bloke in Bristol who wanted a job, which meant I could go and get what do you call it? Some money, for going, I don't know.
Oh, redundancy.
Yeah, redundancy, that's right, redundancy, which I took. And he was so pleased he'd got a job of responsibility. But there was redundancy because it was a contracting service then. And that's what made it easier for me to. When the time came to retire, that last evening, the school had finished, they'd all gone home, and at 5 o'clock I was still in my office weeping. And I didn't know, but the French couple were there at home. They'd come over and there was a party for me. And they came to fetch me and I was sat in my office. I didn't want to go. I did enjoy my life. The kids had made it an enjoyable experience. And people think I'm mad. They think, oh, but then there's something wrong if, you've liked your job that much. But most of the staff seem to think, oh God, I can't get out quickly enough. And now they've got to go on to 65, I believe. I don't think they're going to be able to retire with pensions as easily as I was able to do with redundancy. And so it saved my life. It is said I would have been 6 foot under within so long if I'd stayed out. But there we are, I'm a very lucky man. Very lucky. It really is. I'm very grateful.
You were saying that you had noticed there was a change in your relationship with students with this. You were talking about this youth culture.
Yes, the youth culture was more than creeping into our schools. The yobbishness was there, but I always prided myself that because of being there a long time, teaching a lot of the parents of these children, that a lot of my good name had been passed on, And I didn't find it difficult. The children say today, we were frightened of you. In fact, the chairman of our flower show said that openly on Saturday. We were afraid of him, because my eyes are everywhere, and I couldn't just, it wasn't difficult, but you saw things and the kids knew you saw things, so that they avoided doing things in your presence, And that went on, and then I had a boy. He was from he was broken home, but he had a very bad background. And I had put myself out to help him, and I had helped him. And he was doing something very stupid, and I said, "Come on, now, pack it." "Fuck off," he said. Now, I have to tell you, within seconds of him saying that, I collected my green document from the office. No one had ever thought. Yes, they had a swear word, on the play or in the sports field or in the workshop, because that's what life's about, But when he stands up there and he's 6 foot tall and he tells you that, I thought, I'm no good anymore. Because you can't do anything about it. There's nothing you can do. I mean, such was the situation in punishments, you couldn't do anything about it. You did it through eye contact, respect, regard, and understanding. But when they start doing that, to me, Because I dealt with kids who'd got a bit uppish with young women, you know, young members of staff. In fact, I'd walk about the place and I could hear riots, you know, and I'd go in. And when I was there, they'd stop, you know, which is rather nice, and we'd, you know, or come out, you know, and deal with it. And you could do that. And obviously some of our punishments were levelled at kids who'd gone over the mark with young women, you know. They really, because there were rather attractive young women in there, what, 22? Think about it, you know. And these lads were 15 and 16, and, you know. Yes, that's why I finally was made to retire. I had to retire. I should have retired. I was pressed to retire. But when someone did that to me, I felt this is no place. I can't face that. I've never had that before. I've always had you know, they've had a few words. I mean, I've had to deal physically with one or two lads to get them to calm down, you know. But no one stood up and said that. I mean, I was watching this program on the Second in Modern School this week, wasn't it? And this girl who said, so-and-so has never done that, and you're not. You didn't see the program. And anyway, she was kicked out. But I mean, we could deal with that in the old days, in the Second in Modern days. But now, when kids have got so much, you know, about them, it's exceedingly difficult. And I just wonder how some of our young women cope today. I say women, but young men for that matter, because you know, they're equally at risk. But that's what prompted me to, not prompted, made me go straight across. I just could not believe it. So that's it. I got my green sheet, filled it in, and I was accepted. And I've been offered it before. Yes, terrible world.
I just got one or two more questions to ask you. I wanted to ask you, what would you say was the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part? Oh dear. I suppose it's having to punish someone when you don't really think punishment is the answer. Because in any school, we have to have a code of practice, which means that there's fair shares all the way around. And I remember a colleague of mine, another housemaster, we had a problem with a particular boy, and he was a problem, but he linked up with another boy in my house, and they were really sort of gangsters, I suppose, you know. And it was a question, we've got to do something about this. And Tim said, they're going to get 6 of the best. Well, I didn't think that was the answer. I really didn't. But, you know, he said 6 of the best. So we met these 2 lads, and I had to do what he had done. And it hurt me more than it hurt the child. I think he wouldn't agree with it. I mean, it just disappeared, but it left its scars. I think it's having to punish when really punishment is not going to solve the problem. I think if we had more time, trouble is our classes were large, our groups were large. I was a full-time teacher. You didn't have a lot of time for children to come in and have a chat because they had problems. And I used to say, you know, you're expected to come and talk to us, your tutor, or to me. But if we had up to 100 teachers, if there is one teacher in this school you feel you can go and chat to, you've got my permission and you've got his permission. Just go to someone whom you can relate to. And we certainly had one teacher who was a charming chap, and I know he was very popular, but he kept his secrets because, you know, it's got to be. You just can't go, you know. I think that's the problem, is listening to children, having to punish children who have come from something pretty awful when they left home in the morning, and they're not going to be happy being told to do this and made to do that and listen to some 20-year-old girl, you know. And I appreciated that. I like to think I could see their point of view, but I had to do something. Counsel them and calm them down. I'll give you a little story. We had a girl, she was an adopted girl, and she was wonderful with music. So wonderful that her adopted mother paid for her to have lessons in Bristol. Now the girl was as thin as a lath, and when she was 15, she probably didn't even have any nipples. She really was not a very attractive girl, very plain uniform, you know. And she got into a spot of trouble, and the deputy had dealt with it, and then I had to deal with it. So when she came to me, she was crying. And so I was able then, I shouldn't now, put my arms around her and just say, come on, come on. She said, well, no one likes me. I haven't even got a boyfriend. Well, one can appreciate boys want big busted girls, you know, this little girl. And I remember saying to her, you have something that none of these other children have got, most wonderful voice. Well, she stayed with us and did her GCSE. Then she wouldn't stay any longer. She went to Bath Tech. From Bath Tech, she went to the Guildhall School of Music. And she became Susan Chilcott, the international opera star who died last year of breast cancer. And I was with her mother last Tuesday. Her adopted mother last Tuesday. Yeah, Sue Chilcott. So, you know, I suppose, again, it's luck. I've got something, obviously. I took the right road. You know, it all worked well. But it's luck, really. But it is, I think, the most difficult thing is putting children right. Because they're always right. I mean, you've got children. They're always right. Your dad knows nothing. But my friend, I mean, when I taught, I was always so anxious, because I taught RE, one of the subjects I taught throughout my school life, was religious education, which they had loved because, you know. And I did a social study with two groups. And it was interesting in one of my investigations, to whom do they go to chat to if they got problems? Well, Dad they certainly don't go to. Mum they wouldn't dare go to. Some did go to Gran, if the Gran was about. But otherwise they went to their friends, in inverted commas. Well, they're the last people you should go, they're the same age, you know. And that was quite an eye-opener to me, that they weren't able, in a happy family, to go and talk. Probably if they had an elder sister or brother, an older one, they might do so. But it's to whom do they go if they've got this thing they want to discuss, whether it was development or whatever. And it was very difficult. They didn't go to Mum, they didn't go to Dad, but they might go to Gran, but they talked to their friends, who really, friends was not the word. They're the last people they should rely on their expert advice, you know. Yeah.
Now, I think you've already sort of answered my second question, but what would you say was the thing you enjoyed most about your work?
I just enjoyed being with kids. It seemed natural, you know. I mean, there was noise and there was bustle. You're on the go all the time and shouting and bawling and sorting things out, but it's kids. You know, they were my life. It was never any trouble to go to school. In fact, when I started teaching, well, right up to the end, I would give up my evenings, my weekends. Clubs, we didn't get paid. Now, if you run a football club, someone gets paid after school. Or it's hockey, someone gets paid. We did it free, gratis, and for Saturdays we were away, you know, to matches. Yeah, I was just one of the lucky ones. That's what they call it, vocation. It worked. And I'm so lucky because I retired here where I spent the last 52 years, you know, and I meet granddads and grandmums and mums and dads, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I mean, when I was at the flower show last week, you know, there was so many came through, and they were my old students, and I could say the right thing or the wrong thing, you know, and we could get away with it. And my wife, we get boys, because when she came to do PE, she did a stint at my school, you see. And one of the things we had was country dancing. Of course, my wife was a young PE mistress, and some of these louts didn't want to dance. But she grabbed hold of them, you know, and some of them are now about 6'4", you know, and they see Jean and they just wrap their arms around her and give her a kiss and a cut, and they love it because she was once their teacher, you know, and took them dancing, and they had 2 left feet. Yes, no, I have to say it, deep down, it's got to be the children. You want the money or the holidays. You didn't have the money to enjoy a holiday. No, it was a very interesting job. Mainly, I think, because we could go out into a world as missionaries. We could do things. The world was there for us to do things with. Now it isn't. It's all contracting. You know, there's not the opportunities to develop what we could do, because it's very much curriculum orientated, you know, exams and league tables and so on. Whereas we could enjoy games and fun and concerts, and we used to have a dance the winning house, right from the day I went there in '52. Every Monday was the house had a dance. Wax records, you know. And I remember one girl, her father used to stoke the boiler down at Rithington Pit, and very poor home, but she was a lovely girl. Well, they're all lovely girls. And that girl went home after school, we say at 3:45, washed the one and only dress that she had to put it on to come back to the party, because I danced with her and it was wet, and she told me. You know, it's children, really. And I'm lucky, I've got 4 very fine children who are caring, very kind to us, you know, and worry about us. Yeah. So it's worked. It's worked.
Yeah. Dennis, I've had a really good time this afternoon. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's
I've
great.
enjoyed listening to you. Thank you again.
Lovely.